When the department called to offer me a night patrol job, I accepted before they could even finish describing it. I'd been out of work for 3 months. The paycheck didn't matter. The hours didn't matter. They said security work, and that was enough. It wasn't until the first briefing that I realized where they were sending me: Greystone Penitentiary, 40 miles past the edge of town. The place had been closed for almost 15 years. The last inmates were transferred out after a collapse in one of the lower isolation wings. The state had kept it sealed since then, waiting for a demolition order that never came. The warden's office smelled of damp paper and dust when I arrived to sign in. He was an older man named Strickland, with gray hair cropped short and hands that trembled when he shuffled through folders. His voice carried that hollow tone of someone who'd spoken too long to empty rooms. He said the job was simple: patrol the grounds, check the locks, log anything unusual. The building had its own power grid still functioning somehow. There were no inmates, no staff, just me. Contractors were scheduled to begin demolition the following month. Until then, I'd be the caretaker. When I asked why a condemned building needed round-the-clock patrol, Strickland didn't answer right away. He just stared at the pen in his hand like he was remembering something unpleasant. Then he said, "You'll understand once you've spent a night there." I laughed lightly, but he didn't join in. The drive out was long and empty. The main highway dissolved into a gravel road that wound through pine forest. The trees grew so thick they blocked out the horizon, leaving only a tunnel of gray-green shadows. My headlights caught glimpses of rusted signs: state property, no trespassing, bent and pitted from years of neglect. When the prison finally came into view, it looked less like a facility and more like a mausoleum. High stone walls, razor wire sagging under its own rust, and a front gate that leaned slightly off its hinges. The central tower rose above it all, windows dark, the flagpole bare. A single floodlight over the main gate flickered on as I pulled up, casting a dull orange glow across the sign. Greystone State Penitentiary. The letters were chipped and faded, but they still carried weight. I parked near the entrance, engine idling while I gathered my flashlight, clipboard, and radio. The air outside smelled like wet metal and pine needles. Every sound felt amplified: the crunch of gravel, the creak of the gate, the echo of my own footsteps. The moment I stepped inside, the temperature dropped. The lobby was wide and hollow, lit by a single row of fluorescent bulbs that buzzed faintly overhead. Old security posters clung to the walls, their edges curling. A reception desk sat abandoned, the phone still on its hook. Behind the counter, a framed photograph hung crooked, a group of guards smiling beside the warden, their faces yellowed with age. Someone had scratched a word into the glass at the bottom corner. Stay. I tried not to look at it too long. The first patrol log was easy enough. The corridors stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with metal doors and grated floors. My footsteps echoed like they were following me. I moved through the blocks in sequence, A through C, marking each checkpoint on my clipboard. Most of the lights worked. A few flickered, humming in irregular rhythm. I told myself it was routine, nothing more. But every time I turned a corner, the air felt heavier, as if the walls were leaning closer. Halfway through my first round, I stopped near the administrative wing. A row of nameplates still hung beside the offices. One read Dr. K. Briggs, Psychiatric Division. Another, Warden J. Strickland. That last one made me pause. I just met him in person that morning. So why did the plaque look decades old? I brushed it off as a coincidence. Maybe his father had run the place before him. Maybe the name was reused. Still, something about it stayed with me as I continued. The deeper I went, the more the building seemed to shift. The air vents whispered faintly. Rusted pipes popped and creaked in the walls. My radio crackled once with static, though no one was on the other end. When I stopped to listen, I thought I heard faint movement below, something like chains dragging far beneath the floor. I told myself it was water in the pipes. Around midnight, I reached the main cell block. The walkway stretched above rows of empty cells. Every door was closed except one near the far end, slightly ajar. The number plate read C12. Inside, the air smelled different, not stale, just wrong. Damp, sharp, metallic. There was a single shoe in the corner. The leather was cracked, but the sole was wet. A faint footprint led toward the drain in the floor and stopped. I closed the door slowly, listening to the latch echo down the row. By the time I finished my route, the clock in the control room read 2:17 a.m. My log sheet was half full, my nerves almost steady again. I sat at the old metal desk and stared at the monitors. Only two cameras worked, both showing black and white feeds of the main hall. Dust floated through the air like falling snow. The silence was almost comforting until I heard the sound again, metal tapping. Soft at first, then louder, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It came from the far corridor. I checked the camera feed, but it was blank. When I stepped into the hallway, the noise stopped. The corridor was empty. I walked its length, scanning with my flashlight. Every door locked, every handle cold to the touch. Just as I turned back, I heard it once more, 3 taps, this time behind me. I spun around. Nothing, only the low hum of lights overhead. By 3:00 a.m., I convinced myself I was hearing the building settle. Old places make sounds like that. Still, when I returned to the office, I locked the door from the inside. The rest of the night dragged. I watched the sky outside shift from black to a faint blue haze. At dawn, the first bird call broke the silence. When I stepped outside to the parking lot, the fog had lifted slightly. The prison stood behind me, its walls catching the early light. For a moment, it almost looked peaceful. Then the wind shifted, and I smelled that same metallic odor again, faint but unmistakable. On the gatepost beside the road, I noticed something I hadn't seen when I arrived. A small carving etched into the rusted metal. 4 vertical lines and 1 diagonal slash crossing through them. A tally mark. Freshly cut. I looked back at the tower one last time before getting into my car. The uppermost window caught the sun, flashing like a signal. When I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was reflection, nothing more. That lie carried me through the drive home. But even as I pulled into my driveway, the hum of those prison lights seemed to follow me, low and steady, buried somewhere deep in the back of my head. And for the first time in months, I didn't sleep through the day. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that open cell door. The second night felt easier, at least at first. The fear of the unknown had worn down into something quieter, a watchfulness, a habit. I arrived before sunset this time, determined to check every hall while there was still some light. The building looked different in daylight. Less haunted, more hollow. You could see the cracks in the walls, the patches of black mold climbing from the floor. The shadows weren't alive yet. Still, even before the sun dipped, I could feel the weight of the place pressing down. Every sound echoed too long. Every corner looked darker than it should. The power grid buzzed to life as I unlocked the main doors. The bulbs overhead flickered one by one, filling the corridors with their uneven white glow. The air smelled faintly of copper again. Somewhere deep inside, water dripped in slow rhythm. I started my patrol from the central hub, the point where all 4 main blocks met. The air there always felt coldest. The paint peeled away in long strips like paper skin, exposing raw concrete beneath. The floor tiles cracked under my boots. I walked the same route as the first night, clipboard in hand, marking each gate and door. Everything was locked tight. The sound of my boots against metal catwalks echoed off the walls. I reached cell block A around 10:45. The rows of bars looked endless under the fluorescent lights. Each cell identical, each bed frame neatly folded. I told myself that kind of order was comforting. It meant the world still followed rules. Halfway down the corridor, a low groan rolled through the air. At first I thought it was the plumbing again, but the sound carried a rhythm, rising and falling like breathing. I stopped, waited, listened. Silence. When I moved on, my flashlight flickered once, then steadied. In the corner cell, I spotted something that hadn't been there the night before. On the cot sat a tin cup. Its rim was rusted, but the bottom glistened wet. I knelt to touch it. The liquid smelled like iron. I put it back and made a note on the log. Block A, cup on cot. Possibly condensation. It sounded logical enough on paper. By midnight, I'd cleared the main wings. Only cell block C remained, the one with the door that had been left open. I told myself I'd close it again if needed, check for leaks, and finish the round. When I stepped into the block, the temperature dropped. My breath fogged in the light. The overhead bulbs flickered, their hum almost a tone now, steady and deep. Every cell door stood closed except for one, C12, still open. The shoe was gone. I hesitated at the threshold. The smell that hit me was the same as before: wet metal, rust, old blood. I aimed the flashlight across the floor. The drain in the corner glistened faintly. Water, gasoline, I couldn't tell. Then I heard it. 3 slow taps of metal. Tap, tap, tap. Not far away this time, somewhere down the block. I froze, listening. My pulse filled my ears. The sound repeated, sharper now, as if from one cell to the next. Tab, tab, tab. Like someone dragging a pipe along the bars. I shined the light across the row. Nothing moved. The sound stopped. I stepped backward slowly, careful not to make noise. As I turned to leave, the overhead light went out. For a second, total blackness. I could hear my own breathing, quick and shallow. Then a single bulb flickered on above the far end of the corridor. In its glow, I saw something faint, a shape pressed against the bars of the last cell. Not movement exactly, more like the outline of a person seen through fogged glass. The bulb snapped off. Dark again. My flashlight trembled as I raised it. The shape was gone. I didn't run, but I wanted to. I walked fast, heart hammering, until I reached the junction hall. There, the air felt clearer, warmer. Back in the control room, I switched on the monitors. Only 2 still worked. Both feeds showed static. Then one flickered back, the north corridor. A figure moved across it, slow and deliberate, just outside the camera's focus. I leaned closer. The image warped for a second, the outline stretching unnaturally. Then the feed cut back to static. The radio on my belt crackled once, a faint hiss, no voice, just breathing. I switched it off. The rest of the night crawled. Every few minutes I thought I heard footsteps echoing somewhere distant, always one hall over. I followed the sound once, only to find nothing but silence waiting for me. Near 3:30, I went to the main lobby to check the exterior locks. The fog outside had thickened, pressing against the windows like smoke. Through it, the floodlight over the gate glowed dull orange. Something about that light felt wrong. It didn't blink in rhythm with the power grid. It pulsed slowly, like a heartbeat. I looked down at my hands. The flashlight shook. My reflection in the glass trembled with it. When I looked up again, the light outside stopped flickering. It stayed perfectly still. The next sound came from above me, a faint creak, then another. The catwalk. I aimed the flashlight upward, the beam cutting through dust and darkness. For a moment I thought I saw movement, just a brief shift, like someone stepping out of sight. Then silence again. I finished my shift without another incident. At dawn, the fog thinned and the world felt normal again. Before leaving, I checked cell block C one last time. All doors closed, all lights steady. The floor was dry. Still, as I locked the main gate behind me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd forgotten something. On my way out, I glanced at the clipboard. Under my final note, "All secure," someone had written a single word in small block letters. Listen. The handwriting wasn't mine. I folded the sheet and stuffed it into my pocket. By the time I reached the road, sunlight had broken through the trees, but it felt thin and pale. My car smelled faintly of rust when I opened the door. In the rearview mirror, the prison loomed in the distance, its tower rising through the mist. I could swear, just for a second, that I saw something move behind one of the upper windows. But when I blinked, it was gone. I started the engine and didn't look back. By the third night, the prison already felt like a place outside of time. The world beyond those walls seemed to fade the moment the gates shut behind me. I stopped thinking about the drive-in, the trees, the road. All that mattered was the building itself, its hum, its smell, its quiet. The air was colder that night. Rain clouds pressed low against the hills, turning the world into a gray smear of fog and drizzle. My breath came out white as I unlocked the entrance. The metal hinges groaned like something waking from sleep. The first few hours were uneventful. Routine check-ins, power logs, temperature readings. My flashlight beam cut through the same empty corridors, each one identical to the last. Still, I felt a heaviness that hadn't been there before, like the air itself was aware of me. When I passed through Block B, I noticed something strange. The old intercom speaker above the control post emitted a low hiss. It hadn't done that before. The line was dead, everything connected to the control room was supposed to be shut down years ago. I stood under it, listening. The static wasn't constant. It pulsed. Soft, irregular, almost like breathing. I moved on. At midnight, the rain outside turned violent. I could hear it hammering the roof, water trickling through cracks in the ceiling. I set my clipboard down and went to the surveillance room to wait it out. The monitors glowed in the dim light. Only 4 of them showed anything at all, the rest pure static. Usually I left them alone, but that night something caught my eye. Camera 7, marked Block D. That feed had never worked. The breaker for that section was disconnected, and Briggs told me on day 1 that Block D was sealed off. But there it was, flickering faintly between lines of static. The image was faint, black and white but unmistakable, a long hallway lined with barred doors. At first nothing moved. Then in the far corner of the frame, a shape passed across the lens, slow, heavy, deliberate. I leaned closer, squinting at the screen. The shape wasn't clear. The camera had bad focus, bleeding light around the figure like smoke. Still, I could tell it was human-shaped. I reached for the radio. "Control to maintenance," I said, though I knew there was no one listening. The radio buzzed with static, no response. The image glitched once, stretching vertically, and when it snapped back, the figure was gone. The feed stayed clear for several seconds before cutting to black. I sat there a while, watching, waiting for it to return. My chest felt tight. The hum of the monitors seemed louder than before. Eventually, curiosity won. I decided to check Block D for myself. The map posted on the control wall showed D-Wing 2 floors below. The stairwell door was padlocked, but the lock looked brittle. I used one of the emergency keys Briggs had left me. The metal clicked easily. The air on the lower level was colder. My flashlight beam reflected off water pooled along the tiles. The smell of mold and rust grew stronger with every step. The hallway stretched into darkness. Doors lined each side, numbered but corroded. The entire block felt untouched for decades. Halfway down, I stopped. Every sound had disappeared. No dripping, no hum, no wind. Only silence so deep it pressed against my ears. I raised my flashlight toward the end of the hall. Something glimmered there, metal maybe. I took a slow step forward, then another. The door at the far end was slightly open. The number plate above it was missing. My pulse pounded. I told myself to turn back. The camera feed could have been a power surge, a glitch, but part of me needed to see. I reached the door and nudged it open. The beam of my flashlight revealed an empty cell. Concrete floor, broken cot, rusted sink. Nothing unusual. Until I saw the wall. Scratches covered it, overlapping, layered. Some were deep enough to cut into the cement. Others were faint, almost delicate. A pattern emerged, a cluster of lines carved in repeating shapes. I realized after a moment that they formed numbers. I stepped closer. The air inside the cell felt warmer, heavy like breath. My skin prickled. Then the sound returned, not loud but sharp. Metal on metal. Tab, tab, tab. I froze. It was coming from the next cell over. I turned my flashlight toward the sound. The beam caught a glimpse of motion, something shifting just beyond the bars. "Hello," I called out instinctively, my voice echoing too loud. The tapping stopped. Silence filled the hall again. I moved closer to the bars. Inside the cell, the cot was overturned, one leg bent inward. The mattress was missing. The corner drain bubbled faintly, water or air rising through the pipes. I took one step back. The drain gurgled louder. Then came a single bang. Not a tap this time, a strike. It echoed through the entire block, bouncing off the concrete until I couldn't tell where it came from. I ran. My boots splashed through puddles, flashlight beam jerking across walls and doors. The stairwell door was still open when I reached it. I slammed it shut behind me and leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. The sound didn't follow, only silence. Back in the control room, the camera feed for Block D was gone again, just static. I stared at the screen until my eyes burned. Eventually, I convinced myself it was all in my head, the sound, the shadow, the warmth in that cell. But when I looked down at my notes later, I saw a wet fingerprint smudged across the corner of the page. Not mine. The mark was gray, almost ash-colored. I wiped it away, but it left a faint ring behind, like something burned into the paper. Outside, the rain finally stopped. Dawn crept over the tree line, turning the sky a dull silver. As I packed my things, I noticed one of the cameras still active on the main feed. Not Block D. This one was pointed at the corridor outside my office. A faint figure stood there, perfectly still, facing the door. I turned slowly in my chair. The hallway was empty. When I looked back at the screen, the figure was gone. For the first time since taking the job, I waited for daylight before leaving. I didn't even lock the door behind me. I barely slept that day. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw the scratches on the wall of that sealed block, the numbers repeating over and over, 44. By late afternoon, I'd convinced myself to quit. I'd tell them the place was unsafe, electrical issues, unstable flooring, anything. But when I tried to make the call, no one answered. The number that used to connect me to the department just rang and rang before cutting to silence. So I drove back. The clouds hung low again, a blanket of pale gray pressing down on the forest. Rain had stopped, but everything glistened wet. The trees looked darker, heavier. When I pulled up to the front gate, a figure was already waiting for me. It was Briggs, the older maintenance guard who handled the generator checks. I hadn't seen him since my first shift. His jacket was soaked through, the collar turned up, and his eyes had the dull glaze of a man who hadn't slept in days. He didn't smile when he saw me. "You've been poking around," he said. I asked what he meant, but he just gestured toward the building. "Block D, you shouldn't have gone down there." His tone made me pause. "It was unlocked," I said, "I thought." He cut me off. "It's not about locks, it's about time." The words didn't make sense then. They still don't. But something in the way he said it chilled me more than the wind ever could. We walked together into the prison. His boots echoed differently from mine, heavier, slower. He carried a ring of keys that looked far older than the doors they opened. I noticed his hands were trembling slightly. The power was back on, the halls glowing that sickly shade of white again. The hum of electricity filled the air, low and constant. Briggs stopped by the security office and took a seat at the desk. He poured himself coffee from an old thermos and gestured for me to sit. "What you saw," he said, "wasn't new. It's been happening since before they closed this place. Most of us learned to ignore it. The smart ones anyway." I stayed quiet, waiting. He leaned forward. "When the prison shut down, they didn't move everyone. Not at first. Some of the isolation wings were still occupied. Paperwork said they were empty, but that wasn't true. There was one inmate left, number 44. The way he said the number made me sit up. "They tried to transfer him," he continued, "but he didn't survive the trip. Heart failure, they said. Still, his cell stayed sealed. For months, nobody went near it. Then guards started hearing things, footsteps, knocking, voices calling through the vents. They thought someone was trapped down there. When they opened the cell, it was empty. But after that, it got worse." He paused, rubbing a scar along his knuckle. "Worse how?" I asked. He looked past me toward the hallway, his expression distant. "They'd see him, not clear, not all at once. Reflections mostly, glass, metal, water. Then one of the guards went missing. The cameras caught him walking toward D block right before the lights cut out. When power came back, the cell door was shut again. No sign of him after that." My throat went dry. Briggs reached into his jacket pocket and slid something across the desk. A small key, tarnished and old, tied to a faded red tag. "This is for the emergency gates," he said. "Keep it with you. If something happens, if the lights start to flicker or if you hear the tapping, don't follow it. Don't look. Just get to the outer gate and wait for daylight." He stood to leave but hesitated by the door. His hand hovered on the frame as if he wanted to say more. "They'll tell you this place is empty," he said quietly. "But it's not, it's waiting." Before I could ask what he meant, he walked out. The sound of his boots faded into the distance. For the next hour, I tried to focus on work. I checked doors, logged temperatures, and reset the breaker that kept tripping near the East Hall. Routine made it easier to ignore the tension crawling up my spine. Then, around midnight, the tapping started again. Not faint this time, sharp, deliberate. Tab, tab, tab. It came from the far corridor, the direction of Block D. I gripped the flashlight, forcing myself to breathe evenly. I told myself it was pipes expanding, old metal shifting. Then something else followed. A low hum, not mechanical, human, like someone exhaling just out of sight. I took one step forward. The air in the hall thickened, pressing against my ears. The lights flickered once, twice. From the corner of my eye, a shape moved. I turned the flashlight toward it. Nothing. I turned back toward the main corridor and froze. The cell doors along the hallway were swaying slightly, their hinges groaning in unison. None of them were open, but each one moved as if touched by a breeze. The air was perfectly still. I backed away slowly until my shoulders hit the wall. My radio crackled to life on its own, static hissing through the speaker. Through it, faint and distant, came a voice. "Don't look." Then silence. I waited there until the light steadied again. When I finally moved, my legs felt weak. The rest of the night passed in fragments, checking locks, logging nothing unusual, forcing my thoughts to stay mechanical. When dawn broke, I found a note taped to the inside of the security office door. It was written in shaky pen strokes on yellowed paper. "Stay above ground. Do not go below the east corridor." The handwriting was Briggs. I pocketed the note and stepped outside. The morning fog was thicker than before, hanging over the parking lot like smoke. I could barely see my car, but as I walked toward it, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, perfectly in sync with mine. When I turned around, there was no one there. Only wet concrete and the faint outline of boot prints leading from the gate toward the prison doors. They weren't mine. The next day passed in a haze. I couldn't stop thinking about Briggs, his voice, his trembling hands, the way he said it's about time. He hadn't returned my calls since that night. When I drove back to the prison for my next shift, I told myself I'd find him first thing, ask what he meant, and tell him I wanted out. The main gate stood half open when I arrived, the chain that usually secured them hanging loose. I almost turned around right then, but the thought of quitting without warning, of leaving the paperwork unfinished, didn't sit right. I told myself I'd finish the week, collect my pay, and never set foot there again. Inside, the air was colder than before. My breath fogged as soon as I stepped through the entrance. The hum of the power grid was softer tonight, like it was coming from somewhere deeper underground. The first thing I noticed was the smell: old paper, dust, and something faintly sour. The warden's office door was open. I hadn't seen it that way before. Inside, piles of boxes were stacked on the desk. Some had been ripped open, their contents scattered across the floor: folders, typewritten reports, old key tags. The room looked like someone had gone through it in a hurry. I sat on the floor and started reading. Most of it was routine maintenance records, staffing logs, disciplinary forms. Then one file caught my attention: a worn brown folder stamped with the number 44 in black ink. Inside were photocopied reports, all dated between 1986 and 1989. The name on the top sheet was inmate Henry Goss. The file described him as a lifer, convicted of murder, solitary confinement for repeated violence toward staff. But as the reports went on, the tone changed. Less disciplinary, more desperate. April 4th, subject reports hearing voices from the ventilation system. Claims the others talked to him from inside the walls. May 9th, temperature drop in isolation wing recorded at 44 degrees Fahrenheit despite functional heating. Electrical malfunctions reported concurrently. June 3rd, subject ceased responding to guards. When food tray collected, inmate found standing against far wall, facing corner, unresponsive to verbal commands. The final entry was brief. June 6th, subject relocated to East Isolation for observation. Cell sealed after incident. Transfer documentation incomplete. No signature, no closure, just a blank line where a name should have been. I leaned back against the desk, the folder open across my knees. The pages smelled like mildew. At the bottom of the pile, something was tucked between two reports: a Polaroid photo. It showed a cell door. Number plate 44. The surface was scratched and dark as if burned. Across the frame, a faint shape, something pale and human-like, stood just beyond the bars. The image was slightly blurred, but I could see enough. The eyes were missing. I dropped the photo back into the folder. My pulse thudded in my ears. When I left the office, I noticed a door I hadn't seen before. Half hidden behind the filing cabinets, its frame painted over in the same dull gray as the walls. A small brass plate above it read record storage. The handle was cold to the touch. Inside, rows of shelves stretched into darkness. Boxes lined every wall, labels faded to nothing. The air was thick with dust. My flashlight beam drifted across loose papers, photographs, and old cassette tapes scattered across the floor. I picked one up at random. The label was almost unreadable, but the number stood out clearly: 44. A tape recorder sat nearby, coated in grime. I brushed it off, loaded the tape, and pressed play. At first static, then faint voices. "He won't sleep. Keeps talking even when he's alone." Temperature dropping again. A chair scraped, then a man's voice, low and tired. "We sealed the block. I don't care what he says anymore." Then silence. A click. Then a whisper so close to the microphone that it distorted the tape. "Still here." The playback ended in a burst of static that made me drop the recorder. The sound echoed off the metal shelves, bouncing around the small room until it died. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally stepped out, the corridor lights were flickering again. The hum of the power grid pulsed like a heartbeat through the floor. I needed air. I walked to the central courtyard where a few broken benches sat under the cracked skylight. Rainwater had pooled in the concrete troughs. The surface rippled faintly, though the air was still. When I looked closer, I realized the water wasn't reflecting the ceiling. It was showing something else. A cell door, the number 44. The ripples distorted the image, but I could still make out a figure behind the bars. I stepped back, the reflection disappeared, the water went still again. A voice came over the intercom, above the courtyard entrance. "Security check, East Corridor." The line hissed, then died. I didn't remember calling that in. I didn't even think the intercom system still worked. I went back inside. The hall stretched ahead, dim and gray. At the far end, the light above one door flickered rapidly, strobing white against the concrete. As I got closer, I realized it was the access door to the east wing, the same one Briggs had told me to avoid. A heavy lock hung open on the handle. I reached out slowly and touched the chain. It was warm. The smell hit me next, metal and damp earth, stronger than ever. When I shined the flashlight down the corridor beyond, the beam barely reached the first corner. The air shimmered slightly, as if alive. A sound drifted out. Not tapping this time, not breathing. A faint scraping, like nails on concrete. It was enough to make me stop. I stepped backward and pulled the door shut. The click of the latch echoed too loud in the empty hall. When I turned, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A handprint, smudged across the inside of the window next to the door. The fingers were long, the print smeared downward, like it had been dragged from the other side. That's when I noticed the condensation on the glass. My own reflection stared back, pale and distorted, but behind it, faint and colorless, another face. Watching. I dropped the flashlight. The beam spun across the floor, landing on the far wall, right over a single word scratched into the paint. "Listen." I didn't remember seeing it before. I didn't remember hearing the scratching either. But as I stood there frozen, the sound began again, slow and rhythmic, from deep inside the east corridor. Tab, tab, tab. Each one timed perfectly with my heartbeat. The tapping didn't stop. It echoed through the east corridor long after I'd closed the door, spreading through the walls like a pulse. I stood there listening, trying to convince myself it was just old pipes, shifting air, anything. But the rhythm was too steady, too human. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more, always the same. By morning, I was shaking. I didn't even remember driving home. My mind kept replaying the sound and that handprint on the glass, how it looked wet but left no moisture when I touched it. The logical part of me kept trying to build an explanation. Maybe condensation, maybe a draft, maybe my eyes playing tricks. But deep down, I knew. Something in that corridor was awake. That night I told myself I wouldn't go near the east wing. I'd stay in the control room, check the cameras, do my rounds above ground, keep to the light. But that plan didn't last long. When I arrived, the generator lights were already on. Someone had been there before me. The clipboard by the main entrance, where I signed in every shift, had a fresh note scrawled across the last page in jagged handwriting. "East wing check in progress." No signature. I froze. No one else was assigned here. Not Briggs, not the warden, just me. I called out, but the only response was my own echo. The sound system crackled overhead, one of the old loudspeakers sputtering to life. Faint static, then a burst of breathing. Slow, uneven. I stared up at it, waiting. The breathing grew louder for a few seconds, then stopped abruptly with a click. That's when I realized the tapping had started again. It was faint at first, like a heartbeat buried under the concrete. Then clearer, closer. Tab, tab, tab. Coming from below. I followed the sound toward the central stairs, each step heavier than the last. The air grew colder as I descended, and the smell hit me halfway down, wet metal and dust, stronger than ever. The corridor to East Isolation stretched out ahead, the same one I'd locked the night before. The door was open now. The lock lay on the floor, chains snapped clean through. A thin trail of moisture led inside, glistening faintly under my flashlight. The temperature dropped the second I stepped through. My breath hung thick and white in the air. The walls looked different down here, older somehow, the paint bubbled and flacking like skin. Rows of sealed cells lined the hallway, doors welded shut decades ago. Their number plates had long since rusted away, except for one. The door stood slightly ajar. I felt my pulse in my throat. The tapping had stopped. The silence pressed so tight against my ears that I could hear my own heartbeat. I raised the flashlight and stepped closer. The floor beneath my boots creaked softly, the sound swallowed by the thick air. The gap between the door and frame was narrow, but wide enough to see into the cell. The walls inside were scratched, the same patterns I'd seen before. Numbers, lines, marks layered over one another until the cement looked alive. Then my light flickered. For a fraction of a second, something moved in the back corner of the cell. A shape, tall, pale, featureless, shifted just out of view. I stumbled backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The door creaked open another inch, slow and deliberate. A gust of air rolled out, cold enough to make my eyes water. From somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered. Not clear, not loud, just one word. Down. The light died. Total darkness. I fumbled for the spare flashlight on my belt, my hands trembling so hard I could barely hold it. When the beam cut through the dark again, the cell door was fully open. The space inside was empty. But the scratches had changed. The numbers were still there, 44 repeated endlessly, but beneath them new words had appeared, carved deep and fresh. UOPNED. I stepped back until my shoulders hit the opposite wall. The air vibrated faintly, like something humming inside the concrete. Then came a sound that made every hair on my body stand up. Breathing. Not mine. It came from the hallway behind me, slow, heavy, wet. I turned, flashlight trembling in my grip. The beam caught something at the far end of the hall. A figure stood in the shadows, half-turned, watching me. It wasn't moving, but its outline shimmered faintly, like heat rising from pavement. The light seemed to bend around it. "Who's there?" I called out, my voice cracked. No answer. I took a step forward. The figure twitched, just slightly, and then the lights overhead exploded into flickering chaos. The bulbs strobed white and orange, throwing the corridor into disorienting flashes. In each burst, the figure was closer. 10 feet away. 5. Then gone. The light steadied. The hallway was empty. I didn't wait to see more. I ran. My boots slammed against the concrete, echoing like gunfire. I didn't stop until I reached the main floor and burst through the door into the lobby. The air felt warm again, heavy but alive. I collapsed against the wall, gasping for breath. When I looked up, the front window was fogged over from the inside. And in that fog, something had been written with a finger. Stay. I wiped at the glass, but the word remained, etched faintly beneath the condensation. The lights in the hall flickered again. This time it wasn't random. The pattern pulsed slowly, 3 short flashes, a pause, 3 long ones. I realized after a moment that it was Morse code. SOS. A distress signal. But not from me. I forced myself to check the cameras again. Only one feed still worked, the one for the east corridor. The monitor flickered in and out of static, but I could see enough to make out the open cell. The door was moving, swaying slowly back and forth, though no wind touched it. Then a shadow passed across the frame. It stopped right in front of the lens. The screen went black. A second later, white text appeared across the feed, as if typed directly into the image. He's awake. The power grid surged. Every light in the prison shut off at once. For nearly 10 minutes, I sat in the dark, clutching the emergency key Briggs had given me. When the lights came back, the message was gone, but the monitor still showed the open cell door. And just beyond it, barely visible at the edge of the frame, something was standing upright, facing the camera. It didn't move. It didn't need to. It was waiting. When the lights went out that night, everything inside me froze. Not the kind of fear that makes you jump or scream. This was deeper, colder. A silence so complete that even my thoughts seemed to echo. The hum of the generators, the buzz of the fluorescent bulbs, even the soft whine of the security monitors gone. What replaced it was the kind of quiet that feels alive, like the air itself was waiting. The backup lights should have kicked in immediately, but they didn't. That told me one thing: this wasn't a power failure. Something had cut the main line. I switched on my flashlight. The beam barely cut through the dark, the air thick with dust and cold moisture. Each breath came out as mist. My radio hissed once in my hand, a faint burst of static followed by a voice, low, broken. "Don't move." Then it went dead. I held still. Somewhere in the distance, metal clattered to the floor. The sound bounced through the corridors, distant but deliberate, like someone had dropped a key ring and walked away. That was followed by a second sound. Footsteps. Soft, slow, wet. They came from the east corridor. I gripped the flashlight tighter and forced myself to move. Every nerve screamed to run, but I couldn't leave the control room unguarded. I had to check the power grid first. The generator panel sat in the corner of the maintenance office, its old dials still faintly glowing from the emergency battery. I flipped the reset switch. Nothing happened. Then from behind me, a whisper. "Stop." It came from right beside my ear. I spun around. No one there. Only the empty corridor stretching back toward the main hall. My flashlight beam shook as I swept it across the floor. At the far end of the hall, one of the doors was open, a thin rectangle of deeper black inside the darkness. The air pouring from it was colder, heavy with that metallic scent again. I took a single step closer. The door slammed shut. The echo rolled through the whole prison, metal on metal like a scream. My radio crackled again. A voice, distorted, layered with static, came through. "Block D open." It wasn't my voice, but it was me. The same tone, the same rhythm, just slower, as if played on a damaged tape. The flashlight flickered. When it came back, the words "Block D open" were written across the wall beside the breaker panel in dark streaks of something wet. I backed away until my shoulder hit the wall. The air began to vibrate, faint but growing stronger. I could feel it in my teeth, a low-frequency hum that seemed to come from below the floor. Then light. Just one. A single bulb flickered on above the stairwell leading down to the isolation wings. Everything else remained dark. Something wanted me down there. I told myself I'd go just far enough to reset the generator feed. 5 minutes, maybe less. Then I'd get out. The stairwell was slick with condensation. Each step echoed like a drumbeat. When I reached the landing, I noticed the walls here were damp, streaked with black mold and faint scratches that looked like writing. Not words, numbers. All 44. Dozens of them carved again and again, over every surface. The humming grew louder. I followed the sound to the generator room. The door was already open, swinging slightly. The beam of my flashlight caught the edge of a puddle spreading across the floor, water mixed with something darker, thicker. The generator itself looked intact, but its casing had been torn open, wires hanging out like veins. And there, on the far wall, written in the same dark streaks as before, were words that made my stomach twist. "He came back." Something dripped from the ceiling and hit my wrist. It was warm. I aimed the flashlight upward. The ceiling wasn't solid anymore. Cracks spiderwebbed across it, through which something pale and fibrous pulsed faintly, like veins under skin. Then movement. A shape shifted behind the pipes. I heard a scrape, then the faint drag of something heavy along the floor. I took a step back. The puddle rippled outward, as though something beneath the surface was breathing. My flashlight sputtered again. The beam caught a glimpse of what was crawling out from behind the generator. A hand. Not decomposed, not fresh, just wrong. The fingers were too long, the nails cracked and gray. Then came the rest of it, slow, deliberate, pulling itself forward in silence. The outline was human, but its head tilted at an impossible angle, as though the neck had been broken and never set right. I stumbled backward into the hall, slamming the door shut. The impact made the walls shake. I turned and ran up the stairs, two at a time. Behind me something followed, not running, just moving steadily, dragging, never breaking rhythm. Tab, tab, tab. The same sound, the same pace, always just behind me. I reached the main level, lungs burning. The flashlight beam danced across the walls. The word "listen" was everywhere now, etched into paint, scratched into glass, scrawled across doors in charcoal black streaks. Then light. The floodlights outside the main gate flickered on all at once, flooding the courtyard in a dull orange glow. The power was back. But the cameras in the control room were still dead. Except one. Feed 7. Block D. The monitor flickered, clearing just enough to show the hallway below. The cell marked 44 stood wide open. In the doorway, something stood motionless. For a moment I thought it was Briggs. The posture, the uniform, it looked human. But when the image steadied, I saw its face. It wasn't a face at all. Just smooth, pale skin stretched where eyes and mouth should have been. The shape turned slowly toward the camera. The screen warped. Then the lights in the room blew out, one after another, until I was back in total darkness. Somewhere outside, the prison gates groaned open. The wind carried a sound through the hall, not words, not breathing. A single, deliberate knock. Tab, tab, tab. Right behind me. The knocking didn't stop. 3 slow taps behind me, echoing off the concrete walls. I couldn't bring myself to turn around. My body refused. Every instinct screamed that if I looked, I'd see something I wasn't supposed to, something that didn't belong to the world I knew. When it finally stopped, I bolted. I ran straight through the corridor and burst through the outer door into the prison yard. The air outside was heavy, thick with mist that rolled in from the forest. The floodlights glowed through it like dull suns, barely illuminating the ground. The gate stood open. It shouldn't have been. The chains hung loose and the padlock lay broken in the dirt. Beyond the fence, the fog spread across the trees like smoke. I should have driven away right then, but the road was gone, literally gone. The gravel path that led up to the prison vanished into the fog like it had never been there. No headlights, no horizon, no sound of the outside world. The silence was too deep. Even the insects had gone quiet. That's when I heard it. Footsteps. Soft, deliberate, packing across the gravel. Not far, 20, maybe 30 feet away. They circled, slow and unhurried, crunching in the fog where I couldn't see. I called out, my voice shaking, "Briggs." The footsteps stopped. I waited. My breath came out in clouds. My flashlight beam barely reached past the fence. The fog seemed to swallow the light, bending it inward. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time, each one in rhythm with my heartbeat. I backed toward the main door. The beam of my flashlight caught movement, something gliding through the mist, low to the ground, too smooth to be walking. The air shifted. I heard a whisper, faint as breath against glass. "Stay." The same word I'd seen scratched into the window. The voice was neither male nor female, flat, hollow, like sound replayed through a machine. I turned and slammed the door shut. The latch caught, but the sound didn't fade. The footsteps continued on the other side, circling the yard like something marking territory. I leaned against the door, listening. After a minute, they faded into the distance. I should have been relieved, I was, because the silence that followed was worse. It pressed on me, filling my ears, my skull. Then, faintly, from somewhere deep inside the building, came a new sound. A door slamming. Then another. Then another. All in sequence, like something walking cell to cell, closing them one by one. I forced myself to move, one step at a time. Back toward the control room, back toward the monitors. Only one camera feed was working again, Block B. At first it looked empty. The static cleared, revealing a corridor of empty cells. Then, in the far corner of the frame, a shadow flickered across the wall. It moved slowly, dragging something heavy behind it. The motion sensors on the console began to light up one by one. A block, C block, East Corridor. All empty wings, all triggering movement at once. I reached for the radio. "Control to maintenance," I said, though I knew there'd be no response. "Briggs, if you're hearing this, I need a status check on the East Line. I think we've got." Static burst through the speaker, cutting me off. But beneath the static I heard something else, a voice. Low, hoarse, whispering through the interference. "Don't call for him." The radio clicked off on its own. The air grew colder again. I could see my breath fogging in front of me. Then faintly, from outside the office door, footsteps. Not in the yard this time, inside. The handle turned once, slowly. I stepped back, flashlight trained on the door. The metal creaked as it opened an inch. No one entered. Just a breath of cold air that rolled into the room and made the papers on the desk flutter. Then I noticed something on the glass panel of the office window. A handprint. Fresh, clear, 5 long fingers pressed against the inside of the glass. I hadn't touched it. I aimed the flashlight at the door again. It was still half open, swinging slightly. Something moved in the reflection of the monitor behind me. I turned, nothing. But the camera feed had changed. It was no longer Block B, it was the yard. Fog curling over the ground, the floodlights flickering. And there, in the center of the screen, footprints. A trail of them, leading from the broken gate straight toward the main building. They weren't human. Too long, too narrow, the heel elongated into a drag mark. The camera glitched, and the image jumped forward. Suddenly, the footprint stopped right in front of the door I just shut. The feed went black. I stood there shaking, waiting for something to happen. Then I heard the noise again, closer than ever. Tab, tab, tab. Not behind me this time. Under me. The floor. I dropped to one knee, pressed my ear against the concrete. There it was, movement. Something crawling through the old drainage channels beneath the prison, the scraping of nails or claws on metal. It stopped directly below the office. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then from the vent in the far wall, a whisper floated through. Down. The same word I'd heard in the East Wing. The flashlight flickered once, twice, then died completely. In that moment of darkness, I heard the vent grill shift, a faint metallic sound like fingers curling around its edge. I fumbled for the emergency key Briggs had given me, clutching it like a weapon. The grill rattled again, then silence. The lights came back in a single surge, harsh and white. The vent was empty. But in the dust beneath it, clear as day, were handprints, 2 of them, smudged with dark stains that looked like soot or ash. They led toward the door. And then they stopped, as if whoever left them had simply vanished mid-step. The clock on the wall ticked once, then stopped. Every monitor flickered back on for 1 second, just one. And in all 12 camera feeds, in every corridor, every cell, The same figure stood facing the lens, motionless, watching. Then black. The power grid died again. And somewhere outside, in the fog-choked yard, I heard the sound of a gate closing. Slow, heavy, final.